Academy. Welcome again for those of you who've seen me in previous seminars. So today's topic is on standardized testing. It seems like there's always something new with standardized testing these days, but I think it's probably very timely that we have a seminar on this, largely because of the announcement within the last couple of weeks or so of major changes to the SAT, right? So it's also a good time for us to look ahead, try to see how this is going to impact probably younger students, because if you're pretty much like a junior or senior now, it's probably not going to really affect you all that much. But we do have some younger students who do listen to my seminars, so I do want to give you some tips and strategies in terms of how to approach this. Okay, so just to kind of give you an overview of what's going on right now, I do want to talk about what's going on with college admissions and maybe give you some updates in terms of what's going on in both the private schools and the UCs. For private schools, you've seen me, talk about this before, hopefully, that, a lot of top colleges are getting more and more selective. And I think in large part that's because of the test optional policies. As we see more test optional schools, that means typically that more students will take their shot, right? They're going to go ahead and try to send in their application, even if they don't have a high SAT or ACT score, because they feel like, hey, you know what? I got a shot. I got a pretty good GPA. I don't necessarily need an SAT or ACT anymore. And as a result, we see, across the board, this is just a sampling from the Ivy League schools. We've seen the acceptance rates drop dramatically. This is based on last year's, right? The results for this past group or this current group of seniors won't be out for another couple of months, but rest assured, as soon as we have those results, we're going to go ahead and tabulate them and try to, give you the data and analyze exactly what's going on, right? So across the board, what we can see is that I think this disproportionately impacts schools that are in big city, major metropolitan areas. So as you can see in Boston, like MIT, BU, Boston College, you see a drop in terms of the acceptance rates. This is especially true of schools like NYU and USC, where the rates are decreasing dramatically there. But even among the UCs, this is fairly recent data gathered. I think it was just released yesterday or the day before. We see a massive increase in the UCs even after last year's massive increase, right? So 2021 numbers for the UCs, you saw about a 28% increase in both Berkeley and UCLA. And even on top of that, we see another increase this past year for Berkeley and UCLA, right? So Berkeley increased another 14% off of last year's record numbers. So, and especially for Berkeley, we're going to see there's going to be some significant news on this one, and we're going to talk about how that might potentially impact this current group of seniors, right? But UCLA didn't increase as much relative to last year's record numbers. It was already high, going up to 139,000. This year it's 149,000. So it's only an increase of 7%, but it's still pretty significant in terms of the overall numbers. One key trend this year is that every UC campus increased in terms of the number of applications from this past fall, right? So even Merced, last year Merced actually decreased in terms of their number. This year, even they increased. So across the board, the UCs are increasing in terms of the number of applications. So one bit of news, those of you who've been keeping up with the news, last week, I believe, there was a little bit of a controversial move. So local environmental activists and neighborhood activists succeeded in getting an Alameda County judge to order a freeze on UC Berkeley enrollment up to 2020-21 levels, so 2 years ago, right? And I think that's significant because there had been a lot of complaints that Berkeley was increasing the class sizes, but not necessarily increasing things like housing, accommodations, and there were worries that there was going to be environmental impacts, there were going to be local impacts displacing, let's say, for example, low-income housing, which are legitimate concerns, but I think, having this freeze is maybe a little bit of an overreaction. So the problem here is that we're going to have a lot of students who would otherwise have been accepted not be accepted. So the numbers officially that I've been seeing here is that it would reduce the actual incoming class size by about 3,000 and reduce the number of admissions offers by about 5,100, right? So if you see some inconsistencies in the numbers, that's kind of what's going on, right? So the target class size will be reduced by about 3,000. and so the offer will be reduced by about 5,100. Now, that's because they were going to anticipate to increase the class sizes given the record numbers of like, like applications in there. So it was projected to be maybe about like 17 or 18,000 students accepted this year, but they're trying to reduce that to about like 15,000 now to, I guess, keep with this proposal by the judge. Okay. Now that not everybody's happy with this. So obviously the governor is now attempting to get the California State Supreme Court to put a stay, which is a temporary hold on this freeze so that, like Berkeley can just go with the proposed numbers. There also been various like lawmaker proposals in California to try to reverse this somehow, or at the very least get Berkeley to prioritize local applicants or state applicants, right? So if there was going to be reduction, it's going to be largely from either out of state or international applicants. That's at least what's being proposed. It remains to be seen how this is going to unfold within the next few weeks, months, right? So hopefully it's not going to disproportionately impact our students here in California, okay? Now, what does this mean in terms of the projected acceptance rates? So I ran some numbers, and taking a look at this based on what we have from last year, we could see that we're looking at maybe about a 12% acceptance rate total for Berkeley, even with the like using the 2021 numbers or 2020 numbers, right? Now, UCLA is probably going to decrease from 10.7 to a flat 10% acceptance rate. And across the board, there are going to be some reductions, but not by much because we haven't really seen that significant an increase. So we're hoping at least that the UCs will also adjust their incoming class sizes to account for the fact that there are more numbers. Okay, so we're not going to necessarily see as massive drop-offs in terms of the acceptance rates for the UCs as we did see last year. Okay. All right. So other impacts of COVID on standardized testing. So you heard me talk about like test optional policies. So we've already seen that this has had a major impact, right? So as far as the number of colleges now, I think it's very close to about 90% of all colleges and universities are now either test optional or test blind, right? So that's sort of like the policy. In my previous seminars, I said like it remains to be seen whether or not they're going to keep it. It seems like many of them have decided to either keep them for the foreseeable future for the next 2, 3, 4 years, or even permanently, right? So like the UCs have made a decision to keep their system test blind permanently, right? There's no more like talk of having to replace the SAT or ACT with like a UC test. I think that sort of died down now. Now, however, it is something that there's still quite a number of students who still choose to submit their scores. Common App reveals that only 44% of applications last year chose to submit test scores. So it's still significant, right? So like more than half the students decided to go test optional, but there are various polls out there that suggest that many students still want to submit their scores just because it gives them a chance to stand out relative to the applicant pool, especially when they see the acceptance rates and how low they've gotten. Many students still feel like it's vital, especially the ones who know that they can do pretty well. Okay, so these numbers seem to be like there are a lot more underrepresented minorities who do tend to go test optional, whereas a lot of white and Asian applicants still choose to submit their test scores because they believe that it's going to be more favorable for them. However, for highly selective schools, we do see that for Ivy League's caliber schools, for UPenn, for example, about 75% of applicants still reported their test scores. Okay, so the results of what we had seen before, based on the numbers, suggest that yes, there are a lot more people applying. There are a lot more people choosing to go test optional, and that results in basically like reduced acceptance rates across the board. Okay. So the big news that you've heard me talk about, a major change that has been reported, I believe last week, or no, actually like 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think by now, is that the College Board is going to change the format of the SAT in 2024. It was just kind of like vaguely 2024 before, but now they've made it a little bit more decided in terms of they're going to launch it out in March of 2024 is the updated date that I've gotten. Okay, they're going to roll it out even earlier internationally. So for other countries, it's even going to be tested as early as 2023, right? But for domestic students, it's going to be 2024, right? So the major change here is that it's going to be in a digital format. Okay, so no more pen and paper or pencil and paper, right? It will not, however, be an online test that you take from home. You would still need to take it either at school or you would need to take it at an authorized testing center, right? So much like the GRE, which is what you use for grad school, where you would go to an authorized testing center, you would take it on a computer or on your laptop. That's probably going to be a similar format, right? So students will take it either on their laptops or a school approved like tablet, for instance, or one could be issued to them if they don't have one available, right? But it would effectively shut out any other thing that you would be able to look at. In other words, students wouldn't be able to browse online while you're taking the test, right? So, once the software is running, that's going to be the only thing that they're allowed to do. They're not allowed to like leave the actual test, so to speak, okay, until they're done. Okay, some good things about it is those that it's going to actually make the overall test much shorter, right? So projections right now is that the current version of the SAT is slightly over 3 hours. That's going to be cut down to about 2 hours with the new version of the test. Okay. Now, of course, because it's digital, the scores will be available much sooner as well, right? You're looking at maybe a turnaround time of maybe like 2 or 3 days, maybe, as opposed to like 2 or 3 weeks like it currently is, right? So hopefully that is better for students because then they'll be able to get the results sooner and then be able to share it with colleges as soon as they have it. Okay. Now the scale will still remain on a 1600 scale, right? That's not going to change any, but it remains to be seen how the formulas are that they're going to use because it's all based on what you do. It's already basically digitized. The scores theoretically should be out even right after you take it, right? But like the official score report, they'll have to kind of like do their due diligence and checking to make sure that everything was, like I guess official and legitimate when you took the test. So it might be a couple extra days. Okay, so one of the key changes to the test, which allows them to make it shorter, is that it's going to be adaptive, right? So for parents in this seminar today in the audience, you might know that the GRE, if you've ever taken the GRE, that's an adaptive test, right? Which means that actually adjusts by question, which means every question you take, if you get it right, it'll give you a harder one, right? The difference with the SAT is that it's not going to be adaptive by question, it's going to be section adaptive, which means every student will take an initial section. It may or may not even be the same question. It's all based on a pool of questions that you get. And based on your performance on that initial section, it's going to adjust. And the second section you get will then match the difficulty of how you did. In other words, if you did incredibly well, you got all the questions right, you will get a super hard question set for the next one, which is good because if you got the super hard question set, that means that you're already in the higher tier in terms of your score, right? But if you missed a few questions earlier on, it'll give you maybe like a mid-range set for the second one or maybe a lower set tier for the next one. So it encourages students to be very meticulous and accurate during the first part of the test. Okay, so it rewards students who are very accurate because that will determine your placement on the second section. Okay. Now, one of the key things is that when I talk about the second section, that's per reading or math, right? So in other words, there's going to be an initial math section and then a follow-up math section, an initial English section and then a follow-up English section. So your performance on math will not affect your performance in English or vice versa, okay? All right, so there's still a lot of unknowns, right? So we don't know how many questions are going to be in the initial section. We don't know how many questions are going to be in the follow-up section. So we're hoping, at least College Board has promised that they're going to try to release some diagnostic tests for this as early as maybe this fall, right? So there might be 1 or 2 on the Khan Academy website, maybe hopefully this fall. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we will get materials sooner so that we can start to kind of anticipate and be able to advise students, is this a better format for you or not? Okay. So main changes to the English section will look something like this. So the reading and writing sections, they're going to get rid of those long passages that some students really hate because they can't keep focused on it. And they'll be replaced by shorter passages, probably about a paragraph length or so, with one question apiece that comes after them, right? So the good thing about that then is that if you have a fairly shorter attention span, this is great for you. This is great news because you don't have to sit there and try to digest a very long, boring passage, right? There's also been sort of like some talk that College Board will try to make it more, I guess, encompassing or more user friendly, I guess, to people from different backgrounds. So they're going to try to make things more culturally and socioeconomically relevant for a lot more people, right? So we don't know how that's going to look like in terms of the actual passage content, right? But we'll see how that turns out. And they're not going to reintroduce the essay, so that's still gone, right? So I think they got rid of the essay portion about a couple of years ago now. That's still going to be the same. Now, for the math, there are going to be some changes as well. They're now going to allow you to use your calculator for the entirety of the test, right? So that means that they're going to get rid of the non-calculator portion, which some students liked, some students hated that, right? Because they're so used to using a calculator. There's also some talk of getting rid of some of the wordier math questions, right? So like some students really hate those what do you call this, the word problems where you have to kind of like navigate what exactly they're talking about. So they're going to make it a lot more straightforward math, I guess, in a way, right? So students will be allowed to have scratch paper, because obviously if you're doing it on tablet or on a computer, you can't really do the problems on the side. So they will allow you to have some scratch paper. I'm pretty sure they're going to have them at the actual testing location anyway, so you don't have to worry about bringing your own scratch paper. And there's also some talk, this is not confirmed, that they may even have a built-in software calculator. What I've heard is that they're going to partner with Desmos, which is a fairly popular online graphing calculator website, right? So you wouldn't need to bring a TI. Just if you forgot your calculator, there would be some accommodation, so you'd be able to just click an option and have like a window pop up that you could use a calculator, right? Which would be really nice, right? So, but if you have your own calculator and you're very used to it, I would normally recommend bringing your own calculator anyway, just for your own like familiarity with the test. Okay. All right, some other things to discuss. So pros and cons of this new SAT based on how I see it. So one, obviously, it's going to be a plus that it's much shorter, because then, like things like mental fatigue will be less of an issue, right? So some students, they tend to do pretty well when they first start, but by the last few sections, you could see in your diagnostics if your fatigue is an issue, and you tend to miss a lot more questions by the very end of the test, right? So this would benefit those students who can't really focus on this test for like 3.5 hours. So that's good news for those students. The shorter passages will also be good news for certain students, right? Because if, let's say, for example, your kryptonite are those SAT passages where they're really long and you can't really penetrate it because you can't understand what the passage is saying, this is great news for you. This would definitely be able to help you out tremendously, right? There's also the benefit of easier scheduling, right? So if you were to look at the format of the GRE right now, you would just simply contact the testing center and then schedule an appointment, right? You don't have to worry about waiting until the next test date, like 2 or 3 months down the line or something, right? So there will be more frequent test dates available because of the ease of the format, right? So right now for the GRE, you could probably do it like, there's probably going to be like 5 or 6 different times on a given month that you could take the test, right? So more test dates means greater flexibility, probably more locations, right? So that's all good news in that front. The fact that you can now use the calculator for the entire math section is good news for a lot of students, right? I don't know too many students who are thrilled about the fact that, yay, there's a non-calculator portion. I think based on like the way school goes, many students are just used to having their calculators with them at all times. Now, there are some cons based on the way I see it. One is this new adaptive format, initially at least, until we know more about it, might cause some anxiety for students, because this whole notion that like, oh, if you mess up your first few questions, you're already predestined to basically get a bad score. I think that would put a lot more pressure on students to be extra focused on those first few sections. Some students, that might really mess with their time allocation, right? Because they're going to be concentrating way more on the first few questions, and they might run out of time actually on that initial section. So that's one of the things I see that students will need to adapt to. Hopefully then that College Board and Khan Academy do release more practice tests so we can kind of see how to pace students on this one, right? There's also this drawback, yeah. So there's going to be fewer resources available, at least initially, right, for the first couple of years or so, right? Because even though you would still have some tests on like Khan Academy or the College Board website, these wouldn't be prior release tests. They would be like what I like to call like Frankenstein versions of the test, which means a College Board would usually like chop up bits and pieces from prior SATs and then try to make it look like that version that they're proposing in a couple of years. So it's not going to be exactly 100% accurate in terms of your scores either, but at least it'll give you an idea of what to expect. Another downside in terms of long-term preparation for this is that no longer would you have access to question and answer services, right? So like it used to be on certain months and certain test dates of the year, you could actually order the same version of the test that you took. I mean, not exactly the test book that you got, but you would be able to order it and you'd be able to see which questions you missed and better prepare for the next time, right? So because now everything will be in a database or bank of like these questions, College Board is probably not going to be releasing the entire exact test that you took because they want to keep it to be able to use for other students, right? So that gives us fewer tools to be able to kind of prepare, I guess, right? And there's also this uncertainty now in terms of how colleges are going to respond to this new test format, right? So much the same way that there was a lot of like uncertainty when APs said like, oh, we're going to do digital testing. People didn't know how colleges would like look at those AP test results. There's that uncertainty now with this 2024 version of the SAT in terms of how colleges are going to be responding to this. Okay, so a lot remains to be seen. So we're going to have to wait and see how everything unfolds. Okay. All right, so changes to the ACT, there's nothing really new, but if you haven't been up to date with ACT changes, these are some of the changes that have been instituted within the last year or so. There's now an automatic super scoring for the ACT, which means it will automatically just take your highest score per section across multiple testings, right? There was talk that they were going to reinstitute their section retesting, right, where you can choose to only take 1 or 2 or 3 sections at a time instead of the whole thing. But as of right now, there's been no word as to whether or not they're going to institute that for 2022-23. Who knows, right? ACT tends to be sometimes reactionary to changes the College Board makes. So when College Board makes a change, they don't want to be left out. So they might choose to reinstitute it like coming up soon, right? To sort of have their own answer to what College Board has done. But as of right now, we don't know exactly whether or not that's going to be allowed. Okay. All right, so now the burning question that I think a lot of people have is that should you take the old SAT or the old one, the current one, right, or the new SAT when it comes out in 2024? And I think the big question is it depends on your year, right? So there'll be different recommendations depending on your class year, and I'll want to take a look at that here. So as we look at this here, if you are a current 10th grader or older, this is not going to impact you at all, right? So you would just take either the current SAT or the current ACT. And the reason for that is that if they're rolling it out on March 2024, that basically means if you're a current 10th grader, all of 2023, March 2024, you're going to be a senior by then, so it's not going to really impact you. Okay, if you're a current 9th grader, you're going to be this is going to be the first class that's going to be really impacted by this, because this test will be rolled out during the spring of your junior year, right? So that's going to give you some interesting choices to kind of consider. So my recommendation then would be, it depends on your performance, right? So if there are enough diagnostics on this news test and you're doing pretty well, it might be worth a shot. But then again, you would also be like the guinea pig for colleges. So that's definitely something where I would probably err on the safer side and recommend that you either take the ACT, right, which is not slated to change anytime soon, or the current version of the SAT, if you can be done with it sooner. So at this point, that gives you a window. If you're a current 9th grader, it gives you a window of all of 10th grade or the fall of your 11th grade to try to see if you can hit the score you need on the current version of the SAT and just be done with it and not have to worry about the new version of the SAT when it comes out in the spring. Okay. Now, if you're a current 8th grader or younger, College Board and the colleges might actually expect you and only honor the new version of the SAT when it comes out. It remains to be seen, right? So like, when they redid the SAT back in 2005, there was a similar situation of like, oh, is it going to be the new version, the old version that they're going to accept, right? So, it remains to be seen exactly which version the colleges will have you take. At a certain point, if you're an 8th grader or younger, they may just have you take the new version of the SAT. Okay. or the current one. So depending on, because here's the thing, if you're current 8th grader, that would mean that you would have to rush trying to get it done for the new version of, or the old version of the test or the current version of the test. I mean, if you think you can get a really good score by 9th grade or the very beginning of 10th grade, then maybe, yeah, it might be worthwhile for you to try the current version of the SAT. But there's also a risk that some colleges might require you to take the new SAT anyway. So my recommendation then, if you're a current 8th grader or younger, is try to figure out whether or not the new SAT would be right for you, or if you feel like you'd rather use the version where there's more materials or it's more of a known quantity, I would probably suggest ACT. Okay. Again, this is very broad generalization. So, like I think the best thing to do is that, like, if you're getting counseling with HS2, that you probably want to talk to your counselor to try to figure out, because they would know better in terms of your strengths. They would know better in terms of which test format would better suit you anyway. Okay, so another option now is, should you simply just go test optional? Is that something you want to do? Well, in order for you to go test optional, you do need to ask yourself a few questions. One is, do you project stronger as a candidate without test scores or with test scores? I would say, based on my experience over the last couple of years because of the pandemic, there you probably need to be, like, for top schools, you probably need to be a straight A student for you to get pretty decent results for going test optional. Oftentimes, if you're going for like a top 10, top 20 school, if you have like a couple of Bs and you try to get to go test optional, it doesn't fare as well, right, than if you had a test score to report. So I would say, if you're already a straight A student anyway, and you didn't think that you would be able to get a good SAT or ACT score, or if you're apprehensive about the new version of the SAT, you probably can go test optional, right? So it's all about comparing. How are your grades relative to the rest of the applicant pool? Do you have strong extracurriculars to complement your good grades? Because if you have straight A's, but you don't have very good activities, it might complicate things if you don't submit a test score. Okay. If you do plan to submit a test score, try to figure out, like, are your test scores competitive, right? So my recommendation would be to shoot for the 75th percentile, which means you're going to be in the top 25% of the scores that are reported. So we can take a look at that later to try to see what those, where that falls for many schools. Okay. You do want to do your homework when you're applying to colleges and find out, like, what, like, if you're a younger student, what's it going to be like in terms of the prior year, like how many students went test optional, what's the acceptance rates. We can take a look at some of the data on that one in a little bit here, right? So this is actually kind of intriguing. So I got this from a colleague that did some number crunching, and he found that for a lot of schools, there's actually a higher acceptance rate if you submit an SAT or ACT versus if you went test optional. Now, granted, this is only from schools that had this data available, right? So, but we could still see that for some of these schools, like a Georgia Tech, for instance, right? 23% acceptance rate if you submitted SAT or ACT versus 10% for test optional. That's a whopping 130% increase, difference, right, in terms of acceptance rate. For some schools, it's not a huge deal. Like Vanderbilt, it's probably pretty close, but there are some schools where it's a massive difference, like Emory here, Colgate, BU, for instance. They're pretty big differences if you submitted an SAT versus if you didn't. Okay, so that would certainly be something that you want to track, whether or not you do want to go test optional. So if you do decide to submit your scores, there are certain things to keep in mind. You do have to sort of like estimate where you fall, right? So and that's one of the things that I want to talk about, right? So are your scores strong enough to submit, or should you simply just go test optional? So let's take a look. So first, you'd want to be able to look at your target scores and see how they compare relative to your target schools, right? So as you heard me say, like, you want your scores to be in the 75th percentile. So 75th percentile would normally, nationally be speaking, you're going to be in the top 25%, but we typically in admissions call this the Asian average, because it probably falls in line with what we've seen in terms of HS2, what the numbers are, right? So so that's definitely something that we would be looking at here. So now here's the thing, though, is the longer this whole policy of test optional goes, there's going to be a gradual skew towards higher test scores. What I mean by this is that over time, the students who have lower test scores simply aren't going to submit them, so that like the test scores that are being submitted are typically going to be higher and higher. So over time, the average will go up. Okay. So that's definitely something that we want to keep in mind here, right? So the average scores are going to be higher over time. So one of the things that I want to show you here is this is kind of like a sampling of the 75th percentile scores of top colleges, both for SAT and ACT. And as you can see, the bar is already pretty high, right? So if you're aiming for like a top 10 school, like a Harvard, Stanford, MIT, you already 1550 or higher, right? And so what I'm saying is that over time, that's even going to go higher as fewer students who are scoring lower would submit their test scores. Same with the ACT, you probably need to be about a 35 or so in order for you to get that, okay? Now that's across the board, like you're looking at, yeah, probably about 1,500 at least to be competitive for like maybe a top 25 or top 30 school, and about like 1,550 or higher to be competitive for like an Ivy League level school. Okay, so what is this skew thing that I'm talking about? So if you're looking at like a normal distribution, I'm using USC as an example here, so it's not necessarily like super high, but like still a fairly competitive school. So for USC, based on prior years, you would have like the 25th percentile be at about a 1370, which means students who are in the bottom 25% would score a 1370 or lower. The median score here, the 50th percentile, is going to be about a 1450, right? But the 75th percentile is going to be about a 1520. Now, over time, as USC continues to go test optional, you're going to start to see a skew where the bottom 50% are simply not going to submit their scores anymore. So instead of a 1450, the average scores are now going to skew closer to about a 1500, right? So that's not going to be exceptional anymore. That's going to be like the average of people who submit scores to USC. So in order to impress USC, you're probably going to need to have maybe like a 1550 or higher eventually, right? So that's pretty much what's going on now in terms of what do you call this? This upward skew in terms of the test scores, right? So it's unfortunate. It's been happening for a while, but test optional policies are simply going to accelerate this rate of the average test scores getting higher and higher and higher. Okay. What about AP test scores? How does this factor into everything? So are AP test scores going to be now used to replace SAT or ACT? No, right? So one of the things we're seeing is that College Board is making this change to the SAT because they still feel there is a role for the SAT, right? So colleges are not going to go replacing SAT or ACT now with AP scores, especially because they're going to, adjust and change this version of the SAT to better sort of suit what the needs are for colleges. Okay, so AP testing was never really designed for as admissions tests, which is why the scale is really just a rudimentary 1 to 5. So the way colleges have been using AP test scores is really, to contextualize your transcript. What I mean by this is that they will typically look at your AP scores and see whether or not it will support or corroborate the grades that you're getting in your AP classes. So if you're an A student in your AP class, you should really be getting a 4 or 5 on your AP test, right? But if they see an inconsistency, let's say, for example, you're getting an A in an AP class, but you're getting a 1 or a 2 on your AP test scores, and everybody else in your class or your school is doing that, it might suggest to the colleges that you're applying to that there might be some grade inflation going on, right? So in light of the fact that in the last couple of years, AP testing has been a little bit like, I guess, irregular, right? With the online testing and everything, they're not necessarily going to put a lot of disproportionate weight on the AP exams, right? So it's there as an extra data point, but it's not going to replace testing, right? So the best way to think about this is that for the schools that are test optional, you want AP courses. You want to be able to take rigorous AP courses and have that distinguish you from other students who are taking less competitive classes, because the grades, your transcript, now become the most important thing, the most impressive thing that colleges look at. if they're comparing you against other test optional students, okay? However, AP testing is great if you're taking the classes, but don't go rushing to go ahead and self-study for AP tests, thinking that that's now going to be the replacement for SAT or ACT. That's not really the way colleges are going to be evaluating them, okay? So what I would suggest is take very strong classes, challenge yourself by taking very difficult, rigorous AP classes at your school, but also make sure that you do pretty well on the AP tests, right? So like I said, get a 4 or 5. You don't have to have straight 5s if, you're gunning for APs for top colleges like the UC, the Ivies. You do want to make sure though that like you try to minimize the number of 4s you get. Like, so a competitive candidate to like a Harvard, Stanford will probably get mostly 5s, if not all 5s, right? An occasional 4 or 2 is not going to necessarily hurt you, okay? All right. So one of the key things that HS2 does is, we do prepare students very well. We have courses specifically to prepare you for SAT and ACT. And we do, especially now that it's already about to be March, have a wide offering of courses specifically prepare students for things like the AP test. One of the things that we're proudest of is that consistently year by year, we've gotten really, really good results. Now, this is still last year's results, but in the next couple of months, when we do the next couple of seminars, we'll be getting results. We are now starting to slowly get results from some colleges, but as of last year, we've been consistently getting results, getting students into a lot of the top Ivy League schools, top schools like Stanford, MIT, and across the board, we've been very successful in getting students into top UCs like Berkeley and UCLA. Okay. Now, one of the key things that we have this spring is that we have a wide offering of AP courses that are now available, right? So students will be able to take these classes to prepare for just a wide range of AP classes that you're going to be taking. So if you are planning to take an AP test, one of the key things is that year after year, we've had our best teachers preparing students for these top APs, right? So definitely feel like HS2 would be able to help you maximize your results and be able to get the best possible AP scores, okay? All right, so there's not as much going on, so I wanted to, have a longer Q&A session today deliberately because, with all the new changes, I know that there are going to be a lot more questions. So, feel free to go ahead and type it into the Q&A box, please. And yeah, so I'll start Q&A a little bit early today. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have here. So the first question, is it a good strategy to keep changing the first choice in National Merit Scholarship finalists to get more schools noticed from NMSC to have a better chance at admission? However, USC required the first choice to qualify for half tuition, right? Okay, no, I don't know if switching it around is going to matter, because honestly, if the school doesn't necessarily have any sort of scholarship tied to that, it's not really something that colleges really pay all that much attention to in terms of feeling like they're your top choice. I mean, to be frank, if, for the types of colleges that, you'd be looking at that, like interest isn't really even an issue. Like if you're talking about like an Ivy, so, strategically changing your first choice there is not even going to register. Okay. It would only really matter for schools that are not very selective, or even, listing them as your first choice might matter a little bit. So that would be for like much, much less selective schools. Okay. Next question is, my son is taking AP Physics C E&M outside of school. His school will offer it his senior year and he wants to take it then as well. Should he take the AP exam before then and wait until he finishes the class in his senior year? Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting thing. Is he taking the class for credit? Is he taking it at an accredited institution that offers a transcript? In which case that might be problematic, because then if you're taking the test before you take the class at school, then it sort of makes the class look less important or redundant even, right? So I normally recommend taking the test after you take the school class, right? It's not really beneficial for you to take it before you take your school's class. And colleges do recommend that you try to maximize the offerings at your high school first before you do anything outside. So I would say probably just use the current class. If it's not for credit anyway, if it's not something where you get a transcript, just use that as a preparation for next year's AP course, and then take the AP exam after you take the AP test itself, right? Or AP course itself. Okay. So yeah, I don't really see it as that significant. I mean, unless you're really gunning for like things like AP Scholar stuff, but that's not really important in the grand scheme of things. There's a reason why AP deliberately trimmed the number of those AP Scholar awards because it just, wasn't really as impactful in the grand scheme of things. Colleges want to de-emphasize that. Okay. All right, next question. Is a B in an AP class better than an A in a regular class or vice versa? Oh, okay. So this is one of those classic Q&A questions that I typically get at seminars. Okay, so obviously the best case scenario is an A in an AP class. But if you were to push me a little bit more on that, I would say, yeah, sure. A B in an AP class is still better than an A in a regular class because even though the impact and the GPA would be similar, right, in terms of the weighted versus the unweighted, so like a 5.0 is what you would get in an A for an AP class, 4.0 if you got a B, a 4.0 if it's a regular class. Getting a B in an AP class still shows colleges that you're willing to take more rigorous coursework. So yes, a B in an AP class would be better, but don't be complacent. Try to push yourself to try to get an A in an AP class as much as possible. Okay, next. Is the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign's computer science major competitive? Yes, absolutely, right? So it says, which is harder to get in for a CS major, Ivy colleges or UIUC? I mean, let's be honest. Yes, it's competitive for computer science, but an Ivy League school is still going to be an Ivy League school. Across the board, the acceptance rates are still going to be lower for an Ivy League school. Even, I mean, Cornell, I guess, would be the lowest one, but Cornell's really good for computer science or engineering. So I would say, yes, absolutely, without a doubt, an Ivy League school is still going to be harder to get into, no matter what the major relative to UIUC. So UIUC would be better for computer science relative to some other private schools, but not necessarily an Ivy. Okay. So next, can I see the turn in and not turn in difference form again? Hold on, which one is that? This one? I'm not sure which one you're referring to. So basically, oh, are you talking about like whether or not you're okay? So if it's this one, the comparison, yeah. So the submit rates are still going to be higher for those who submit the SAT or ACT. But at the end of the day, Easton, it depends on your situation, right? So maybe just ask a question about your situation, and I could probably better answer whether or not you're going to be taking the test or not. So Brittany asks, is it worth doing the SAT if I can't score a 1500 plus? So Brittany, depends on your schools, right? So I would say for some schools, even like a high 1400 would still be better than going test optional, I suppose, right? But if you're gunning for like, even like honestly these days, like a top 40, a top 50 school, yeah, you'd probably want a 1500 if you want to go submit your scores versus maybe potentially going test optional. Again, at the end of the day, it depends on your grades, right? Because if you can get like a high 1400s and you have like 4 or 5 Bs, I would still send the high 1400s, right? But if you're straight A's and you're getting like a mid 14s, then yeah, probably go test optional. It's very situational, and it also largely is dependent on your grades. Okay, next is the time of the AP test prep class PSAT, and how much is the tuition? You can visit our website, hs2academy.com, and you could probably contact the closest HS2 branch. But yes, I believe the times that were listed there is for Pacific time. Okay, next. Do you think colleges will treat the old SAT scores differently from new SAT scores? Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. It remains to be seen, right? So at least the old SAT colleges already know what they're dealing with, right? So it's really tough to see how they're going to be looking at the new scores. There's going to be an adjustment period, of course, by which they would be looking at students who are submitting the new scores, and they'll probably be evaluated in a different pool from people who submit the old scores. I don't think they will do an apples to apples comparison of like old / current SAT versus the new one, right? So there'll be enough students submitting still the old SAT, there'll be enough students submitting the new one, so they can use that as a basis of comparison. So in a way, it's probably much the same that they would be doing comparisons between the test optional pool versus the submit SAT or ACT pool now, right? I think college admissions people have gotten really good at comparing people in different sets. Okay, next is how important is the rigor of the curriculum in 12th grade? I would say it's still very important, insofar as they would still see what courses that you're planning to take, right? So in both the Common App the UC application, they would still see which courses you're taking. And so it's still important for you to challenge yourself by taking the most rigorous classes available. I think they would look down on a student's application if all of a sudden, like, your number of APs or honors classes takes a big drop senior year, right? Keep in mind, so I guess for schools like the UCs, or for if you're applying for early action or early decision, yes, they won't necessarily see the scores or the grades. But if you're applying regular decision, many schools will ask your counselor to submit something called a mid-year report, which still includes the first semester grades of all your classes for, first semester. So yes, of course, your grades are still going to matter in terms of first semester senior year, right? So I would say still have very difficult ones, because that might even be a tiebreaker. In other words, if they're evaluating you versus a student who has a similar profile, but you're taking much easier classes senior year and they're taking much harder ones, they might pick the other student versus you. Okay, next one. If my child can't take in AP courses at school and she decides to self-learn it, would she still get the credit for the class if she passes the AP exam? No, I think it works differently for that. You wouldn't get class credits per se. You would get college credits based on the actual AP test, and you could take a look at the college credits based on what the college honors, right? So there'll be an AP credits page, but they will not give you like an A or something like that. It would not go in your high school transcript if you self-study for an AP, right? So which is why I say self-studying for an AP is not a substitute for it. But if you happen to attend a high school that simply doesn't offer APs, and there's some high schools that do, right? Taking those AP tests might look good, right? Because it shows that you actually know the material at a pretty high level, right? But I wouldn't go out of my way to study for things that you don't already have prepared. In other words, like if you didn't take a class on that in school and you're simply self-studying for an AP test, I mean, it's subject to diminishing returns. Yes, it's mildly impressive, but it's not really necessarily worth all the time and energy, I would say. You're probably better off taking an online college class, right? So with the amount of time that you're putting into it, that would probably be better outcome, in my opinion. Next, is it okay to take AP Physics 2 instead of AP Physics C for a CS major? Yeah, I mean, it depends on how competitive it is at your school. I mean, obviously, like the student who's taking AP Physics C at your high school would look more competitive if that was available, right? But yeah, if you think that C would be too hard, it's a balancing act. You would want to maybe adjust your schedule accordingly to adjust based on like the rest of your classes. Because if you feel like taking AP Physics C would be hard, most AP Physics C courses tend to be a little bit more calculus based. So if you're not, yeah, if you haven't taken calculus, let's say BC, or you're not planning to take it concurrently, then maybe AP Physics 2 would be a better choice for you. Okay, next is, do you offer ACT prep? Yes, please visit our website, hs2academy.com, and we do offer courses for both SAT and ACT. Okay, so Sherry asked, so if I get rejected by UIUC for CS major, the chances of getting admitted to an Ivy College CS major is even smaller? Theoretically, yes, but it depends, right? So some schools like UIUC might also be protecting their yield rate, right? Which means if you didn't seem like the type of student who would want to go to UIUC because maybe you're a little bit overqualified, that may not necessarily be the way you would read it. You might still have a very strong shot at an Ivy League school if you're a very strong student otherwise, right? So many state systems are now prioritizing their own residents these days, right? So I wouldn't necessarily read too much into it just because schools, what do you call this? Like if you didn't get accepted to an out-of-state public university. Okay, next is, I'm a senior. After I take AP test in May, I don't need to update the test scores, right? Do the scores still matter? Well, if you choose to attend a school, you would then want to report your overall scores, right? So let's say you got into X private college, right? So at the end, you're going to want to submit all your AP scores for credits. So it largely, so your senior year APs, let's just say, matter more for credits more than anything else. It's probably not going to have any sort of major impact in terms of the fact that you've already been admitted to whatever college you got into. Okay, next question. My son is a straight A freshman and sophomore year, probably all A's, and 1B in junior year. He got a 1490 on SATs, all A's and 1B plus. So 1490, yeah, I think that would, depending on the schools you're applying to, I would say if you're gunning for like a top 20 school, you'd probably want it to be in the 1500s. Okay, next, Belinda asks, where can you take an AP test outside of school? Normally, each district will have an AP coordinator, so you could probably look at your school district's website and try to see the contact for that. So if you wanted to take an AP test and it wasn't offered at your school, there's usually, you could take it at a different high school within the district. Okay, next. So what if I already exhausted all the challenging honors AP courses prior to 12th grade? There are not too many challenging courses available in 12th grade. What can I do in this case? Well, good question. I think one of the things you could do is you could probably look at your local community college, or you could look at colleges that offer online courses that you could take to supplement whatever you have at your high school. Okay, I think that would be my main recommendation for that. Okay, next is what's the difference between calculus A, B, and BC? It's really just the level and the emphasis. Calculus AB would probably spend a little bit more of the first semester reviewing pre-calculus content and then covering some core calculus stuff. I mean, they cover fairly similar stuff, but I would say BC would cover a larger percentage of more advanced topics, right? So I would say calculus BC would probably cover the equivalent of like a college level calculus 1 and calculus 2 class, whereas calculus AB would largely mostly cover calculus 1. Okay, so if my child takes a class at a community college, does he still need to take the AP exam? Nope, because the college class already gives you college credits by default, just simply by taking the class itself. Okay, all right. So what are your thoughts on my daughter planning to take AP Calc, Bio, and Human Geo for senior year? The school offers a medium amount of APs. That's not really as much information I would need. It would depend on how many the school offers. It would depend on what your daughter had taken junior year. I can't really make a determination based on those APs, but 3 APs would be pretty solid. If you can take 4, that would be even better. But some schools I know put a cap in terms of how many APs you can take. So, I mean, I suppose it's a little bit variable there. Okay. Next, what are your thoughts on IB program? Yeah, so it would be analogous to or equivalent to an AP program. So if your school does have an IB program, try to take advantage of that as well. Next, as a senior, do I have to take the AP test, which I mentioned that I was planning to take? You might as well, right? So, I mean, if you don't do as well, so what's the downside? Just don't send it, right? But if you do pretty well, I mean, some students really grossly underestimate how they would do. If you even get a passing score, the college that you go to might even give you some credits for it. So I don't really see much of a downside to taking it. I mean, yes, you have to study, but like, let's not succumb to senioritis here, right? Especially if you've already paid the money for it, you might as well take it. Next is any suggestions for the students whose school doesn't offer many APs? Shall we self-study and take AP exams? How much extra time is a good guideline for not getting too stretched? Well, that would depend a lot individually on what the student can handle. Self-studying is a good option, but like I said, many colleges would prefer that you simply take online or outside college classes, right? Be it at your local community college or through an online, I guess, extension program or something like that that various colleges offer. Okay, next is, so Sherry asks, I've already submitted a letter of continued interest or LOCI here to Harvard, but I just got a new award or honor, one of the 2 nominees for our school yesterday. Should I update Harvard again, or will it be annoying? Well, if it's kind of brief, yeah, sure, you could probably do that. You can go ahead and submit either through your portal or just send an email to the admissions office. Yeah, I mean, little updates as long as, you don't keep bombarding them with them is probably okay. Next is my kid's school offers IB language class for 11th grade and also AP language in 12th grade. Should my kid take the 11th grade class or 12th grade class? If he takes the 11th grade IB language class, does he need to take English in 12th grade too? Um, it's a good question. It depends on the high schools exactly. I don't think they would be duplicative, I think that would be fine for you to take IB one year and then AP the next. And that's certainly very just dependent on, so I would suggest maybe talking to the school counselor in terms of what the recommendations are, because they would better know in terms of what, would be the best sequence, right? So I'm not getting enough information here in that question to be able to know, like I would need to know the school and, what the curriculum is to be able to make that determination. Next is, I'm a senior after taking AP exam test this May. I don't need to update the college as the test scores, right? Did the score still matter? Okay, so I think we kind of already talked about this. Like, I would still take it because yes, even if it doesn't matter for admissions purposes, you could still take it for credits. Okay, and next, my daughter wants to take, wow, 6 AP courses at school for junior year. While I'm a little bit worried whether she could well handle all those, how many APs would a junior typically take to get into a top 20 college? I think it's pretty dependent on your high school, but like some of the high schools I see here in the Bay Area, I'd say probably about 4 to 5 APs junior year and about 4 something like that APs senior year. It depends on your high school though, because if certain high schools offer way more available APs, and so if the sort of the typical high school student who's going to so it's not an apples to apples comparison with different high schools. So it really is dependent on your high school, right? So if you see that a lot of the top students at the high school that you attend that tend to go to like top schools do have 6 APs, then you probably want to keep pace with the high school. So I would say it's all dependent contextually on how competitive your high school is and what the typical schedule is for your high school specifically. That you cannot make it a comparison across the board with other high schools. Next is, how will study materials for the new SAT format be obtained, and approximately when will it be available? I think I mentioned this earlier. It's most likely going to be available in the College Board website and in Khan Academy. There's going to be a partnership there. And I heard them say that they would probably make them available even as early as this fall, right? So fall 2022. Okay, next. The English teacher quit after the semester in my junior year, and now random substitutes are teaching the class. In this case, can I ask my 10th grade English teacher for a letter of recommendation? Shall I mention it in the additional comments in the application? That's tough. I suppose 10th grade would be okay, but like, you don't have to go with English, right? You could probably ask your history teacher from 11th grade. I would still say colleges would probably prefer an 11th grade teacher, if at all possible, right? Or even 12th grade might be preferable, right? So you could try to see if like you can get to know your 12th grade English teacher a little bit better. I think that would be preferable to a 10th grade teacher if possible. But if the 10th grade teacher really knows you and likes you pretty well, that might be okay, right? So ultimately it just depends. I would say prioritize 11th and 12th first before you resort to 10th grade if possible. Next, is AP Stats difficult? What about AP Chem, AP Physics? AP Stats in most high school tends to be a little bit more of a softer AP as far as my experience goes. So AP Chem and AP Physics would largely be viewed as more rigorous AP classes. Next, is taking AP Physics necessary if you mainly want to go bio or chem? Nope, not at all, right? So many high school students will still get into top schools even without taking AP Physics their entire high school career, okay? All right, so I think that's the last of the questions. Let me see if there was anything in chat. Okay, I think it's more or less the same questions. Okay. Okay, so is taking AP Chem or AP Bio necessary, okay, for a CS major? Not really, not necessarily. So, but like then again, like college or high school isn't necessarily a vocational track. So I would just say take the most rigorous courses you have available, right? So there's not really a necessary thing to take for CS other than maybe APCS if your high school offers it. I think that's the most important thing. All right, so I think that's pretty much all the time we have for today. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you found it helpful. All right, have a great weekend, everybody.